Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Blair and today's video is another video in my If I Could Only Choose 5 series, and today we're talking about probably my most favorite makeup product, and that is concealer. I did have to sit and think for a few minutes about this video, but at the same time, when I think about my favorite concealers, I pretty much know which ones I reach for on a consistent basis. So this was hard, but I also do feel very confident in these 5 choices. So I'm excited to share them with you. If you're interested in my top 5 concealers, please keep watching and make sure you are subscribed and turn on your notification bell so you're notified every time I upload. Let's go ahead and get into my top 5 favorite concealers. Number 1 is actually a concealer I've had a few months, and I don't even use it that often in videos, but I do use it pretty consistently just in my everyday life when I want a good bit of coverage, and that is the Jouer Essential High Coverage Liquid Concealer. What I like about this is it has hyaluronic acid in it. This has definitely replaced Shape Tape for me. A few years ago, really when Shape Tape was becoming really popular, I loved that concealer. That was my number one. I used it every day, no matter what kind of makeup I was doing. If I was putting a lot of makeup on, not very much makeup, I always used Shape Tape. And over the last few years, my preferences in concealer have definitely changed, and this concealer is the closest thing to Shape Tape, but it's not as drying. It does give really good coverage, but it is definitely more hydrating under your eyes. It does dry down to a matte finish. It does not stay tacky feeling. It definitely does dry down, but it doesn't dry out your under eyes. Sometimes Shape Tape looks pretty good when you first apply it, especially if you hydrate under your eyes really well. But then throughout the day, it starts to look really dry. I find that that does not happen with this, so this is like a hydrating version of Shape Tape. In my opinion, it is a lot of coverage for a daily wear concealer, so I don't wear it every day, but when I do want a fuller coverage look and I'm wearing a fuller coverage foundation, this is definitely one of the concealers that I will go for. I wear the shade Wheat in the Jouer concealer, and this is a very neutral undertone. This shade, I definitely do prefer a neutral undertone in my concealers. Pretty much all the ones that I use on a consistent basis are definitely more neutral. I used to buy more of a yellow toned or yellow undertone concealer, but I just find typically neutral undertones are more flattering under the eyes. I don't typically like really yellow concealer or really pink. I just like something right in between. And this shade for me is really nice. I also don't notice this concealer creasing, which is very unusual because a lot of times things that have a good bit of hydration and hyaluronic acid will crease. That's just kind of the nature of a more hydrating product, but I don't notice it with this concealer. I also don't set this concealer. Actually, I don't set most of my concealers nowadays, but I definitely don't set this one because, like I said, it does dry down to a really soft matte finish, and I really like it. If you like more coverage under your eyes, but you do want something that gives you a little bit of hydration, but you still need that coverage, this one from Jouer is great. Number 2 is the least expensive concealer that I'm going to share with you, and I've talked about it on my channel quite a few times. Back when I started my channel a year ago, this was my go-to concealer. I used it every single day, and that is the Catrice Liquid Camouflage High Coverage Concealer. I've shown these before. I have 4 shades in this concealer. That's how much I like it. You can see this one is very used, very well loved. I really need to throw this one away and get a new one. This Catrice concealer, I feel like is a hidden gem from the drugstore because I just don't hear very many people talking about it. I feel like back when it first came out and you could get it at Ulta, people started talking about it a little bit more, but I feel like I never hear anyone talk about this now. And this is such a nice concealer. It is, they say it's full coverage. I would say it's a really good medium. I don't know that I think it's as full coverage as my Jouer concealer, but it gives good coverage. And it's a little bit of a thinner formula than the Jouer concealer, but it still covers. I find that a lot of times with concealers, if you get a thinner formula, it's not thick, so you don't get as much coverage. But this is kind of the best of both worlds. It's a very thin formula, but you get a really good coverage with this. It's also $5.99, so $6. It comes in a decent shade range. It's not the best shade range in concealer I've ever seen, but for $5.99, you cannot beat this. It is also very buildable. The Jouer concealer is not as buildable, I would say, as this one. Probably because it's a thicker formula and this one's a little more lightweight. So if you layer a few thin layers on top, it doesn't get kind of cakey looking, if that makes sense. I can't say enough good things about this. If you're looking for a new drugstore concealer, you want some coverage and you don't like something thick, definitely look into this one. This concealer does dry down to more of a natural finish, and it is just so nice. I love it so, so much. It does have a doe foot applicator. It's kind of a smaller doe foot, but I love it. I love it. I will always have it in my collection. You can get it here in the United States at Ulta, or I believe they have it on Ulta.com also, or you can order it from Catrice's website. Catrice has some really good makeup products in general, but I definitely think this is one of their best. I love, love, love this one. Okay, number 3 is, I feel like I don't hear that many people talking about this anymore. I feel like it kind of was hyped up when it first came out, but then no one really talks about it now, but I love it. And it's the Pat McGrath Skin Fetish Sublime Perfection Concealer. I wear the shade L5, and oh my gosh, you guys, this is such a beautiful concealer. This, in my opinion, is definitely more of a full coverage. The packaging is so nice. It's a glass component. It is very nice, super heavy, and it gives really good coverage, really, really good coverage. This, I will say, gives the coverage of the Jouer concealer, but it's not as thick. It's a little bit thinner. Not that the Jouer concealer is thick, like Shape Tape thick, but it's a little bit of a thicker texture than this one in the Catrice. It just kind of depends on what you're looking for. Concealer is such an individual thing. Everybody has their preferences. When I am using bougier makeup products, I definitely reach for the Pat McGrath concealer. Just the packaging alone, you just feel like you're using something really nice. I know packaging doesn't matter, but it does kind of matter. If you're paying a good bit of money for a concealer, I want it to have nice packaging, you know? And this one does. I love that it gives a pretty full coverage because I do have a good bit of discoloration under my eyes. If you've seen my videos before, you've seen that I always apply a corrector underneath my concealer. So that's another criterion that these concealers have to meet, is they have to lay well over my color corrector. That's why I typically go for a thinner formula, because I'm already applying something first before I go in with the concealer. So that's why I choose these kinds of textures, just for my preference. In concealer, I like something a little bit thinner so I can layer it and it doesn't start to look cakey underneath my eyes, because that's not a good look. So I love this one, and I knew I had to include it in my top 5 because it's just one I really love and I enjoy using and reaching for this. Number 4 is a concealer that kind of reminds me of my Jouer concealer, but it's not quite as thick in texture, but they are very similar, and it's the Colourpop Pretty Fresh Hyaluronic Creamy Concealer. I have 2 of them. I have the shade 40N and the shade 45W. I do typically mix these. I don't use them on their own, mainly because 45W is a warm shade, but it's very, very warm. It's too yellow on its own, so I do mix in a little bit of this neutral shade, and this is a really good shade match for me. I love these. They do definitely remind me of the Jouer Concealer. Not as much coverage and a little less thick, but they do remind me of each other because they both have that hyaluronic acid that just makes them feel really hydrating when you're applying them. So they do remind me of each other, but this from Colourpop with their Pretty Fresh Hyaluronic Acid Tinted Moisturizer is a perfect everyday combination. You can do a little bit of the tinted moisturizer and spot conceal with this. You're good to go. That's all you need on an everyday basis. If you haven't tried the Pretty Fresh line from Colourpop, I would highly, highly recommend it, especially if you like hydrating face products. That is awesome. The new foundation is great. The tinted moisturizer is great. And I have the setting spray sitting here, and I use that all the time too. I was so excited when this concealer came out because I love typically pretty much everything Colourpop comes out with, but I tried their original concealer and I hated it. I can't even think of the name of that concealer, but it was way too drying. It just did not work for me. I used to be into more thick matte formulas in my concealer back when I wore Shape Tape all the time. But my preferences have just changed, I guess, because I'm getting a little bit older, and I just find super matte and thick formulas just don't look that good on my skin, especially when you look up close. Sometimes they look okay from far away, but they don't look good when you look up close. So now I definitely prefer more of a hydrating formula. So anything with a thinner texture that gives coverage and has some hyaluronic acid in it, I'm all about it. Would definitely recommend this one from Colourpop. And finally, I know some of you are thinking you know what the final concealer is, and I gotta say, I know I said I wasn't gonna rank the concealers, but I am gonna say this is currently my favorite concealer of all time. I can't believe it took me this long to try the NARS Radiant Creamy Concealer. I cannot come up with one thing I do not like about this. The coverage is perfect. The consistency is perfect. This shade, Light 2.3 Madeline, is the perfect neutral undertone concealer for me. I just want to reach for this. I honestly have to force myself now to branch out because I just love this concealer. I love it. It does not crease on me. It looks great under my eyes. It looks great on my face as a spot concealer. A lot of days, honestly, I don't even wear foundation anymore. Just when I'm doing really light, quick makeup, I wear a tinted SPF, sometimes a tinted moisturizer. It just kind of depends on the day. And I use this to spot conceal, and that is it. I don't even use a foundation because this is truly all I need. Honestly, I like this so much, I will probably buy a backup of this during the Sephora sale because this is one I will not be without. I keep this in my everyday makeup container, and I literally have to force myself now not to use this one. It's so hard to branch out with concealers when you find one you really, really like, because concealer is tricky. Concealer is trickier than foundation to me, just because your under eye area is so delicate. It's very thin skin, and it's honestly the first place that you start to get little fine lines typically. Even me, I'm 27, almost 28 years old, but I do have tiny little fine lines under my eyes. Nothing crazy, and it doesn't bother me, but I do have them. So when you find a concealer that you love how it looks every time you use it. It's just hard to break away from that, and this is that for me. What's so funny about this concealer, I've talked about this before, but I actually tried this concealer a few years ago in a different shade. And I remember I bought it and I tried it and I hated it. I hated it. And I actually returned it. And I hardly ever return makeup, but I returned it because I really didn't like it. And it was, I forget which shade it was, but it was very yellow. Like I said earlier, I'm just not into super yellow concealers. I like something a little more neutral. And then I guess a year or two later, NARS released more shades in this concealer. I still didn't try it. And then one day I was in Sephora. I walked by the NARS little section and I saw the sign that they always have there that says this is America's #1 concealer. And I saw it and I thought, you know what, maybe I should try that again. I feel like maybe I wasn't giving it a chance because of the color, and that's exactly what it was. As soon as I switched the color, game over. This is it for me. I love it so much. That's something else with concealer is if you don't get the color right, I don't care if it's a fantastic concealer that you love, you're going to hate it. So sometimes keep that in mind. If you don't like a concealer, is it the concealer or is it the color? Because you got to get the color right to be happy with it. It's a lot for me to say a concealer is my favorite because I forget how many concealers I own, but I own probably 40. I would say at least 40 concealers, and I'm constantly trying new ones because I love concealer. I don't know, something about concealers, I just love them. So for me to say something's my favorite, that's a big deal. And I'm going to say it. My NARS Radiant Creamy Concealer is my all-time favorite. I will be shocked if something comes along and beats this one. That's how much I love it. I will be buying a backup because I will not be without this ever. Ever, ever, ever. It's my absolute favorite. That's it for today's video. I hope you guys liked the concealer version of my If I Could Only Choose 5 series. Like I said, I love concealers. I'm constantly trying new ones. Concealers and foundations are my #1 weakness with makeup. I just love to try them. I've tried quite a few too, and I own quite a few concealers, so I was excited to sit down and share my absolute holy grail favorites with you guys. Please let me know in the comments what your favorite concealer is. I love to know what other people are loving, and I'll add them to my list of things to try. That I love to learn from you guys what you love. I actually have a note section in my phone, and I make notes of things you guys say that you like so that I know things to try at some point that I haven't tried already. And I just love hearing y'all's recommendations. So let me know in the comments your favorite concealer. Make sure you are subscribed before you leave today and that your notification bell is turned on so you're notified when I upload my next If I Could Only Choose 5 video. Thank you for watching. Make sure you're following me over on Instagram at the same username, simply.blair. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Remember, simply be you. Bye.